Welcome back, everyone, to a brand new episode of the Crypto and Muay Thai Podcast. I am very excited to welcome our special guest today, Jay Kurahashi-Sofue. He is the VP of Marketing at one of the new Layer1 protocols that is coming out to a lot of fanfare, Avalanche. And I'm super happy to have him on, but also to discuss and dive a little bit deeper into it. Jay, how are you doing today?
Doing really well. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Glad to hear that. It's my pleasure to have you. So for those that may not know your particular background, which I presume there's probably a decent amount of viewers and listeners that might not, just give us a quick, 2-minute, 20,000 foot overview of your background and how you kind of found yourself in this wild world of digital assets and blockchain.
Sure. So I think I'll start from the very beginning. Started out actually touching Bitcoin itself in 2010. So super early, but also at that time, I was not at all informed as to what was going on. It was totally a personal venture. And then a couple of years later, or probably a little bit more than that, then a lot more conversations started to pique my interests. And then Ethereum white paper came out. And I think that started to really cultivate my interests much more deeply, especially in kind of the white paper and rabbit hole space, as we all know. And then in parallel, right around 2016, I was working at an ad agency, primarily working for financial services companies and some tech companies here and there and everything in between. And a lot of the clients that were coming in were focusing on blockchain, and a lot of them are also focusing on cryptocurrencies naturally as a secondary. And once that was starting to come through the doors, the agency was looking to the experts, quote unquote, at that time. And at any early stage, you kind of stick out once you know something like Bitcoin even, or just cryptocurrency as a header. And right around probably like 6 months after that, started to get a lot of interest in my peers within the agency. And so found 3 other counterparts, and we came together and we created a marketing consultancy within the agency I was at the time called Ogilvy. And there we were helping blockchain startups effectively go to market, but also create their brand strategy first, and then scale up and try and make sure that they are as successful as possible. And then that naturally led into kind of the 2017 era, as we all know and love. And that created a lot of hype, obviously. And so the project grew. And then towards the end of its cycle, around 2017, there was just internal decisions between us to say, hey, I think a lot of us want to go in different directions. And I was then looking to see what the next step was for me in my career. And so on the agency side, I was very passionate about blockchain technology and also just the brands that were coming through the surface. And then was thinking, okay, I think the best next step is for me to actually take the plunge and try and see if I could go on the buy side. And so shopped around a little bit, talked to a lot of people, networking, and then ended up at a firm called Fluidity and was there for about 2 years, led the marketing team, primarily was scaling the team, making sure we had a cohesive brand strategy as well as the product marketing strategy, and then finally the go-to-market strategy as well. And then actually as of this this spring, we were acquired by Consensus, and that kind of was where I took the decision to look elsewhere and see if I had other opportunities that were similar. And then naturally came in Ava Labs. It wasn't as streamlined as I'm explaining it, but more or less that was kind of the trajectory. And then at Ava Labs was talked to Emin Gunsire, Kevin Seknicki, and John Wu. They're still the leaders at the time, but when we were talking, those are kind of the main players I was speaking with. We were just talking about different ideas and the opportunities that they had as a global brand, and also just the marketing opportunities. And I think we were looking at each other and saying, I think we need you. And I kind of needed them at the same time to move on with my career. And then since May, we've been on the ground running. I think the biggest milestones have been the token sale that we had in July, mainnet launch that we had a couple weeks ago, and then just completely focused on developer growth as well as ecosystem growth on the Avalanche platform.
Got you. So I know you're not an engineer, you're a marketing guy, but that sort of where you left it sort of takes us to the next piece. It's like, what is Avalanche? So maybe for some of the less technical people that might be listening or viewing it here, and then also technical people as well that are kind of thinking, why should I consider an additional layer two, or look to begin to partition maybe some of my development efforts over to another one as well? So what is Avalanche?
Right.
And just walk us through that. As best as possible.
Sure, sure. So just quick correction is we are layer one, but I guess that is kind of a technicality at the end of the day. So I think the best way I like to describe it is we're just a decentralized platform for building decentralized applications. That's just kind of the simple way to put it first. And the reason why I like to put it that way first is because most of the time when you're communicating these very new concepts, especially with blockchain technology, it's a lot easier to focus on one area, especially from the customer segment, as opposed to kind of trying to boil the whole ocean, if you will. And so I think what's relevant maybe for the listeners on your podcast, Chris, is a highly scalable, highly decentralized I guess Internet of Finance is kind of the tagline that we've been running with, because we find the most interesting space to be the finance sector, but more importantly and more relevantly to the crypto space, the decentralized finance space. And so effectively, we're trying to be a very scalable network that these applications can leverage so they can actually perform at their fullest potential. I think one of the things that's really interesting about the blockchain space right now is there's all these smart contract chains. There's all these payment chains as well, and then I think everything in between. But I think the major issue that most of them have is just scalability, and that's what we're here to try and solve. And I think more related to maybe the other chains that have a lot of activity, they've also seen that scalability may not be a huge issue, but transaction fees might be a huge issue. And so these are all things that we're trying to solve as well. And then I think on the other side, with kind of going back a little bit on the focus comment, I think in the long term, we're trying to also, we have two kind of extremes, right? We have the decentralized side, like very much in the crypto head space, like pretty much everyone that you know on Telegram is probably on one side. And then on the other side, we have these institutions. None of these institutions are in the Telegram channels talking to these guys, but I think they both have an opportunity to leverage blockchain technology. So we're also trying to tackle the institution side, the traditional finance side, making sure that they have the comfort, but also understanding of the capabilities of blockchain technology. And I think the one specific example I could give is we have a feature on the platform called subnets, and subnets effectively make it so you can customize the I guess the validator set that you have on the network. And so what that means for anyone on the institution side is they don't necessarily have to create applications or their use cases on this permissionless system. So this open system that we have that's running, that's Avalanche right now, tied to the AVAX token as well. They can just effectively use the Avalanche consensus mechanism underneath and then build their own permission network. And so they don't have to necessarily have all of their confidential data as a centralized entity would like to keep in their walls, if you will. And they can just kind of leverage the power, but also create their own network, if you will, all on top of Avalanche.
Got you. So are you guys taking a sort of like a dual approach? So kind of like you articulated, to where you're looking to go after and, woo the DeFi, but also DApp, so decentralized application natives, in addition to the institutions as well? Or are you focused in one particular area more than the other, but still realize that there's applicabilities to both sides long term?
So we are taking an equal approach to both sides, I would say, and trying to get as much of the middle as possible. I think where the focus comes in more so probably currently towards the decentralized side is just because we think that the permissionless aspect is much more compelling at the end of the day, and it has much more attention in our immediate space. We're able to, like, for example, like all of the major chains are permissionless, right? Or at least the ones that are trading currently. And those are the ones that are generating the interest, and also kind of that narrative from the 5 to 10 to 20-year roadmap is much more compelling to say, hey, we can create this really interesting trustless network where value can be exchanged by peers without any intermediaries at the base value. And that to us is really cool. And I think that's something that has brought all of us together, right? I think that's why you're here. That's why I'm here. And so that's how we're positioning that in kind of the forefront. But that also doesn't mean that we're not looking at the institution side, like I said. So I think one of the really unique parts about our team, or there's a handful of teams in the space that are positioned like us. And I know my previous role at Fluidity, we also had the same structure as well. But a lot of the individuals that are making up the team at Ava Labs, so the team that's building Avalanche, we have a very deep experience in kind of the legacy finance side, but just legacy infrastructure in general. So, for example, on my marketing team, I come from a traditional agency background. The director of comms comes from a traditional agency background. We all have tradition rooted into our core. And I think that's super important because in order to create something new, you also have to kind of be grounded in reality in the today and also in the past. And I think that strength position to, especially towards the finance sector, is what will kind of carry us forward, especially with the connections that we all have, but also just the way we understand the landscape and how we're able to engage and say, hey, this is how the product at hand. Here's how you might be able to get a benefit out of, if you will, and then here's how you can then implement that technology and then move forward.
Got you. That makes sense. So earlier on, you mentioned, I guess, one of the core value propositions that Avalanche, has in relations to other layer ones and this DeFi space, so decentralized space, is tackling scalability. So a better solution, to the scalability issue. In particular, scalability typically refers to, the amount of transactions, the throughput per second, but also, like you're mentioning before, the transaction fees associated with that whenever you want to make a transaction on the network. So what are, the general, I guess, scalability metrics on Avalanche vis-a-vis, the next top layer one? So obviously Ethereum's scalability issues are well documented within our particular space. And as the DeFi craze has gotten crazier, the gas fees and transaction fees have just sort of gotten out of hand. So that's well known. But I'd be curious to hear, your particular take on it, but also, how Avalanche has positioned itself, square within there.
So prior to mainnet launch, we used to run benchmarks on our test nets. And obviously that's not in a real world scenario or kind of the mainnet scenario, if you will. But when we were running those benchmarks, we were getting, 4,000 transactions per second. And then these are kind of running on these nodes that effectively were emulating a real world scenario. I think one of the things that we are working to do, just to address this exact question, honestly, is to have infrastructure on our end to be able to report that as transparently as possible. So like, for example, if you were to pick Ethereum right now has a really robust ecosystem of tools. Not all of them are made by the Ethereum Foundation. That's the beauty of Ethereum, because they have such a robust developer ecosystem, and all these devs are ready at their fingertips, ready to build these tools to report some of these metrics. So I think a really good example that comes to mind is Ether Gas Station. I think Ether Gas Station is a fantastic tool if people are aware of it. Effectively, it tells you what the gas rate is, what the minimum gas is required to submit a transaction, and it also tells you how fast or how clogged up the network is or how fast it can be moving. And so I think that's what we need to do as a project to be able to push those stats to the forefront, so then everyone knows, hey, this is no joke. We have said in the past that we can hit these benchmarks, and they are effectively hitting these benchmarks in real world scenarios with all these nodes all across the world securing the platform. And so the numbers I'm giving you are just from the benchmarks, to be honest, but I'm pretty sure we are in due to just make those claims again, just to see where we're at in our mainnet. But if you were to process a transaction right now, it's like instantaneous. You can't even tell. And unfortunately, at least on our Explorer, we don't actually note how fast it had completed. So that's one thing that we're just trying to push to the forefront, just so people have that proof point.
Got you. What are the fees associated with it? I guess, what were the benchmark fees that were associated with it as well?
So they're in the cents range. They're not even high at all. So I mean, I have to actually take a look myself, admittingly, as to what the average is. But I mean, it was just so negligible that we hadn't really looked too hard into it, because I think one of the biggest players we're going up against, I think, to try and potentially convince some of the devs to at least try out Avalanche is the Ethereum ecosystem. And Ethereum, at its peak could be like hundreds of actual dollars, and the Gwei is like massively high as well, as you know. So that's actually kind of funny that you asked this now, because I think most of the team hasn't really paid attention as much because it's so ignorably low.
Got
that
you.
perhaps a good thing.
No, 100%. I think that's a great problem to have. So like your approximation that it's cents, for anyone that's been in the space recently, specifically with Ethereum, they'll know that like right there, that's your answer. It's like, it's cents. I don't know the exact, good enough. Like we're moving on, and we're moving forward because,
Right.
gas fees have been so high, on the network. So that's super interesting. Is there a like a developer pool, or how are you guys incentivizing developers to join, but also at the same exact time build some of those tools that you're referencing, so that there is an open and honest landscape to be able to look at the performance metrics, so that everyone can see and say, yes, it is in fact executing on its value proposition that it said it was going to put forth?
Yeah, definitely. So I think like since day one of the biggest focus areas is to create an ecosystem that devs want to be in. And by that, I think that's an obvious statement, but by that I mean, let's make as much of the friction go away. And so tooling is a priority, anything that the devs ask. So when we have I think our primary dev ecosystem, I would say, exists in our Discord. In our Discord, the last time I checked, we might be about 5,000 members, so pretty active, or pretty populous rather. And in there, I think there's a lot of discussion as to, hey, this is something that is a pain point on the platform. Is there X, Y, and Z solution to alleviate it? And one of the things that our devs are always there for is to understand those pain points and then report it back to the wider product team and figure out if we can have a solution. I think that was the kind of like the quick and scrappy way to address the pain points. I think long term, or sorry, maybe not that long term, but I think in the midterm, maybe throughout the end of this year and next year as well, we're going to be focusing on a lot of growth efforts. So one of the major things that we have is Avalanche X. And Avalanche X is our grant program. It accelerates any and any amazing idea that comes through the door. And so far we've had grants that are pushing things like testing tools to make Avalanche more robust. So I think that's a little bit in the background, I think, as opposed to something that's built on top. But we've also had integrations. So like one example is there's a cross-chain decentralized exchange called JellySwap. They're a small but mighty a project, and they have cross-chain capabilities with tokens like BTC, ETH, and now Avalanche. And so I think that is those are two of the examples for the grants. I think, let me see, there's probably others that I could probably share. There's also, yeah, I guess the last piece is just like educational tools. I think there's a lot of applications, there's a lot of tooling, and I think that's also really exciting and all, but also education is really important, because we're kind of creating a new platform, and there are three major chains within the Avalanche platform. So there's the C chain, the X chain, and the P chain, and that's just exchange, contract, and platform, and they all have their place in the ecosystem. And of course, like, you're kind of just sitting there like, all right, well, that's 3 times more than like a chain that just has itself effectively as a layer. And so it's a little bit complex. And so we're admittingly just understanding that complexity and trying to make sure that people understand how they all work in relation. And as we continue to move forward, we'll be able to simplify that work stream as well. And that's with the help of the dev input. And so I think, to answer the last part of your question about how we're going to measure the success, in the Avalanche X program, we have like clear KPIs as to where we need to be and how robust the ecosystem has to be at a certain point. So on a quarterly basis, we have these benchmarks, and we look at ourselves and say, how many grants did we sign? What kind of grants are they? And especially because we're a platform that has smart contracts built on it, and also liquidity should be pouring into it, then eventually we'll be talking about how much value is on the platform, how many users are on the platform, how many transactions are taking place. And I think those are kind of the more traditional metrics that you probably know, and one of them on the more developed chains.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, total value locked is essentially the deity that DeFi, people within pray to. So that totally makes sense. So talking about Discord and using that as kind of like your initial rudimentary way to get feedback on the platform, and then also gradually iterate so that you're creating something that has the least amount of friction as possible to be able to attract devs. Is that kind of like methodology that robust, but also actively reaching out and looking for feedback from the developers? Is that like kind of the community feel that you're looking to build with Avalanche, or is that just something that you have to do right now to be able to get feedback and iterate as quickly as possible, and then gradually morph to something different that might be on the product roadmap?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. I think the main focus there is just to get the ball moving, essentially. Like, I think in order to have devs on your platform, you're going to need to create somewhere that they want to be, like I said before. And so with Discord, specifically, I think there are a lot of things that we're doing. So, for example, like if you go to any of our communication channels, and I'm speaking, of course, from the marketing perspective, um, you will be able to find that link anywhere, and you'll be able to access it as quickly as possible. Also, if you are familiar with Discord, you know that they have that alphanumeric invite link towards the end, and you simply cannot remember that. For us, it's super easy. It's chat.avax.org or chat.avalabs.org. Either one takes you directly into Discord, no problems. And I think that's kind of where we started that policy, just from the marketing perspective and the UX perspective. And if we push that all the way through the product lifecycle, you'll also see that same return on your investment, if you will, on focusing on that frictionless experience, because all these people that are going to come into your ecosystem are going to be like, wow, I had such a great experience coming into it. I also had a really good experience with all the customer support, all the developer support. I also then had really good experience with the tooling. I didn't have any issues. And maybe also meet other peers in the ecosystem. And I think you can kind of see where the direction goes, and it's kind of like a snowball effect, because eventually, as you have these micro wins, if you will, then you'll kind of lead up to a larger win, and then it just compounds its effects effectively.
Got you. That makes sense. Um, One additional thing that might not be applicable to you, because obviously you're not building it. So I don't know if that's something that or privy to. But one of the things that's forefront of my mind is there was the announcement yesterday or whatever from Solana wormhole integration, and I've heard this before, very similar. So for those that may not know, essentially it's just a pipeline, an interstate to be able to transfer Ethereum-based assets easily over to Solana-based assets. So if people are familiar with wrapping, Bitcoin to be able to get it on the Ethereum network, so that you can unlock your amount of Bitcoin, but also be able to participate maybe in DeFi functions or trading or yield farming, whatever it may be, on the Ethereum network. That's sort of like an on-ramp to do that. Solana is creating something almost identical to that to be able to gain assets, or at least create the possibility that assets from Ethereum can easily transfer to Solana and back. And I've heard something similar before as well. I think whenever I spoke with the CEO of Cosmos, they have a similar feature for that network too.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like some of these other layer one competitors realize that Ethereum is, so far ahead. I don't know what the market share would be if you've done any analysis, but I've got to imagine that it's 90% market share, and they think it's better to be cooperative, and then possibly you'll gradually take nibble more and more market share. Essentially how Ethereum said, I don't want to compete with Bitcoin, but we can create this on ramp to be able to get some of Bitcoin's liquidity and also bring it
Right.
to our platform, which will ultimately grow the value of our platform. Is that
Mm-hmm.
something, that methodology, something that you guys at Ava Labs have discussed, thought about, or is it simply, we're creating a better alternative and we're willing to go through the long process or the arduous process to be able to see that dream to fruition?
Right. Yeah. So I think that's a really good question, because it's so top of mind right now, I think, in our
Yeah.
team. So actually, what's really interesting is the bridge that we have currently, we have one bridge that is being built between Ethereum and Avalanche, just on a simple smart contract level. So we have one smart contract on the Avalanche side, and we have one smart contract on the Ethereum side, and both have minting functions and locking functions is kind of the general overview there. And to kind of take a step back, actually, because I may have jumped a little bit too quickly into the actual bridge itself, but I think our policy is, I think in the 5-10 year roadmap, there's going to be many chains that exist in our ecosystem that have dominant market share. I guess one has to be dominant, but in the sense that it's not just going to be Ethereum kind of at the forefront. There might be, you know, X, Y, and Z chain, all kind of having 30% here and there. And maybe it might be even more chains involved. And so because of that ideology, we're thinking bridges are the best scenario for all of us. And interoperability is also super important in that case. And the only reason why we're picking Ethereum first is because of what you just said. Ethereum is the most obvious place to start. And then we're going to continue to build bridges across all these chains that you also mentioned in your question as well. And so to kind of then go back to what I was mentioning with the Ethereum bridge, we do have a bridge pretty much complete, where you'll probably be hearing about this very, very soon. And this is something that also came actually down the pipeline through the Avalanche X program, actually. So it's actually funny that this question follows the previous discussion that we had. And then in the near future, not as close, but I think I would say close enough probably towards the end of this year, we also are working with a lot of leading projects in the space that are owning that interoperability play. And we have a lot of conversations, but also a lot of work that's already started to make sure that we can then have the other even payment chains, if you will, but also other smart contract chains to be interoperable with Avalanche as well. So our doors are open. We're trying to welcome as many people as possible, just so then I think to kind of bring this all full circle, this is all about removing friction. I think if someone were in the Ethereum ecosystem and they want to try Avalanche and all their money is tied up into Ethereum, wouldn't it just be super easy for them to port it over through one of these bridges that we've created for them, just so then they could try it? Like, and if they don't like the experience, they could totally go back and or try something else, Solana or the other ones that you had mentioned as well.
Yeah, so that's super interesting to hear that is the path that you guys at Ava Labs are going to look to do and have integrations for Avalanche. Because I mean, again, I think just like you sort of articulated, it makes the most sense just given the current environment. And I actually do kind of agree with your notion that there can be multiple competing dominant chains that sort of eventually segment themselves based upon what they do best or what their particular blockchain is known to do best. So whether that is being able to do NASDAQ scale speed of transactions on exchanges, which Solana sort of purports to be able to do, versus, X and X for these individual platforms. So I think that is, sort of an appropriate path for how it is and moving forward. Because ultimately, just like we're kind of seeing with DeFi, a lot of money will move over, but whenever there's a cool down period, which some would say we just went through, I didn't see a lot of, wrap Bitcoin, whether it be, just straight wrapped or through Ren BTC or any of the other, or Keep Protocol BTC, moving back, where you saw the total value locked up. So it seems like it's there potentially, for the foreseeable future. So I could see that happening with you guys as well.
Definitely.
Especially if there's interesting application that gets built, or a new interesting process that comes out of sort of this experimentation, like sort of yield farming just burst on the scene, and now every other protocol that's looking to issue has some sort of feature of yield farming within it.
Right. I think you're exactly hitting that point. Like, even though I think even in this discussion and any discussion that occurs in our space, we're all talking about, these very specific moments in time, and it almost seems like it's been decades of innovation, but all of this has happened in 5 years, 10 years, and probably nothing more than that. And so the space is changing all the time. It's also too early to even say, like, Ethereum knows what they're doing. They might not be this DApp focused, or I guess DeFi focused chain in 5 years. They might be something completely different based on perhaps, their ETH 2.0 implementation that might bring in a new I guess piece of innovation. Yield farming also might morph into something else. There also might be something interesting in NFTs. You have no idea. So I think what we're trying to prepare for as much as we can on Avalanche is saying we're going to remove the barriers of all the things that we talked about before with the scalability, the transaction fees, and then have a sandbox that people actually want to play with, and also without actual limits involved. And so you're effectively being able to create any idea that you want with the same type of transaction capabilities that centralized entities have, but in this decentralized fashion.
Got you. That makes a lot of sense. I tend to say that a lot on this podcast. That's why I was thinking. I was like, is there a way I can rephrase that to something else?
No, that's the aha moment. I honestly, like, one of the things that I love about crypto is you just sit there, you let it churn in your head a little bit, and you go, all right, okay.
You're like, yes, I can definitely see that. It's like that's actually.
It just requires a little bit of like I think a silence or something, just so you can have it marinate.
No, for sure, because like there's all these really, really smart people and really, really interesting people that come from all different backgrounds, but ultimately it sort of intersects in this one, central sphere that you don't get to think about. Like, you're all driving the same direction in the same car, but someone else is thinking about it from one particular perspective because they're an engineer by trade, you're a marketer by trade, finance person by trade, and then you're like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. I didn't think of it like that. It's like, well, of course, that's not my background. That's not how my brain's necessarily wired.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. So quickly, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the newest sort of craze that's going on with NFTs or non-fungible tokens. I know you guys, you're open for business to any and all, but has that been anything that you've sort of looked at that could potentially plug in to what you guys are building over there? And particularly, I've seen some initial work with NFT based loans, which kind of falls into that DeFi space. I don't know if you guys have looked into it extensively, but I just figured since it was kind of like the soup du jour of the day, I'd at least mention it before we kind of moved on.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think, you did hit that on the head, where we are open to anything. And I think recently NFTs have gotten a lot bigger. NFTs also have been around for some time, especially since CryptoKitties brought it into the space. And one of the interesting relationships that we've been building, since I've joined the team actually back in May, is a relationship with Polyant Games. And so Polyant Games is one of the leaders in the NFT space, or Polyant Labs is the company that has all of these kind of different NFT type products. I believe they're a venture studio, and one of their major products is called Polyant Games. And one of the initiatives that we have working with them is they are in development of an NFT decentralized exchange, and that is going to launch on Avalanche as well. And so we're going to have AVAX and their token PGFK. It's kind of like a membership token. I don't know the exact use cases for the utility for the token, but I know just high level it is a membership token, and it grants some sort of perks if you are an early supporter of the project. And so I believe that should be coming through very, very soon. And if you go over to their Twitter, they have this beautiful, beautiful UI. You can see how the DEX looks, something that I feel like the techies and kind of the crypto heads will get really excited about, especially because NFTs have become a hot topic item recently. But also, I think all intents and purposes, like a lot of the focus areas, at least on the contract side or the smart contract side, have been in DeFi and not so much in the NFT space in general. And I think a lot of the focus, having it shift, will also then bring a lot more innovation into the NFT space as well. And probably a little bit of the two to merge. As you mentioned, I think you might have been referencing Ave's kind of NFT lending product that they have. I actually don't know that much about it, but I know they do have that.
Yeah, I can't even remember specifically what it is. Sure, I guess it's probably that one I read.
One of the many,
one of the many that I saw in a newsletter, and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting, because I've gradually started to pay more attention to the NFT space, but in all honesty, it was never something that was really on my radar, and like to kind of truly understand it, just because like you were talking about for one of the tokens that you're going to be partnering with, it's rooted out of the gaming industry. I'm not a gamer at all. Like I didn't really grow up with that. So for better or worse, there's nothing pro or bad about being a gamer. But so like a lot of those applications and value propositions that people talk about, it goes over my head a lot of times, because it's just not something that I necessarily understand. But I'm trying to shorten my learning curve a little bit, because
Sure.
obviously it's like gaming's like, it's not like gambling, but it seems there's a lot of things that blockchain-based solutions, in particular NFTs, have tons of applicabilities. So there's a big product market fit for that, very similar to way blockchain, especially in some of these early days, gambling had a big fit for as well. So I'm trying to learn a little bit more about NFTs and shorten the learning curve a bit.
Yeah, and I think also another interesting space that I've tried to look into just personally is the NFT art space. And I remember the first time I saw it like 2 or 3 years ago. There were a couple of projects, and I actually went into their Discords and their Telegrams and just started talking to the team members, being like, "Hey, so does it matter that if a digital art is on your computer and that's tokenized in an NFT, if you will, and does it matter if I can just copy and paste it and just download it?" And that was like my kind of base level question. And then they kind of talked to me and they're like, "Well, no, like think about it this way. Like you have the Mona Lisa in the museum and you have all of these famous paintings. You can go up to it and take a photo of it, but you don't have the original." And I still haven't really closed that gap personally, because I'm like, well, the one issue is like if I screenshot it, it is pretty much the same replica of what is there, but I think we'll get to it there. And that's kind of where I'm just admitting like where my gaps are as well. And I have a creative background. I'm a photographer, and so once I think I get that opportunity, then I think the aha moment will come to the surface. But until then, I think I'll just still have to continue doing my digging and just maybe watch from the sidelines.
Yeah, I don't understand that as well. I agree with you, and they're like, and other things with games, they're like, this monster has the ability. It's like it fits in this game. It's like, this doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't I don't really get it and see how value, or why people would pay multiples of what it costs to sort of be just created. But a lot of people that I've spoken to, they think digital art is going to be one of the next big things. Pomp like put out
Yeah.
his thing saying that he's taking a big push into investing in
Hmm.
there. And then I spoke to, who else was it? Andrew Steinwold of Zima Red newsletter. He's a big NFT guy. But he was saying he's spoken to traditional art people and digital art people, and they both agree that digital art's one of the next big things. So it's like, all right, I guess I need to get some exposure to digital art. But it's like
Yeah.
I look at it and I'm like, this doesn't look good to me. I don't know what I'm going to do with this. So
I think the collectible space is a little bit easier to wrap my head around too. Maybe that's where we probably find common ground, because collectibles, you have scarcity, and scarcity, then you could potentially have the value appreciate based on the demand of that scarce asset. So I think, I mean, one of the things that comes top of mind, do you know Hayden Adams is kind of side project Unisocks?
I've heard of it. I couldn't tell
He
you what it's
has
about though.
he has tokenized socks, like actual socks that you wear on your feet, and you have 500 socks, and each sock has a token. I believe it's an NFT. If not, it must just be an ERC20 token. But in any case, it kind of serves the same purpose as an NFT. And basically, there's just a limited supply, and if you redeem it, you burn the sock out of the liquidity pool, and the scarcity goes up. And so, just kind of transferring that idea, just to mention, like I think I checked when Uniswap did their airdrop, and the Unisocks were valued at around 10,000 US dollars. And so the first price of the sock was, I believe, $1, I think, and it just is dynamically priced like the X over Y pricing mechanism that Uniswap has. And that just goes to show, the space kind of like appreciates scarcity. I think humans appreciate scarcity. So maybe there is something there, and kind of transferring back to the NFT conversation, perhaps, but I don't know, I'm not sure.
I understand economics. I understand the supply side of the
Yeah,
equation.
right,
I don't
right.
understand the demand side of that,
That's, yeah,
econ
true.
101 equation. It's like, okay, there's like 500 digital socks. It's like, it's a digital sock. Like
No, no, no. It's a real sock. It's a real sock.
oh, it's a real,
Not that makes it that much different. But it's a digital token that you can redeem for a real pair of socks.
that makes it worse in all honesty. That lost me even more. But
Yeah, sorry to break that to you.
maybe you and I should start a support group or a help group for wrapping our heads around NFTs, or at least
I'm down.
trying to find a pocket of the space where
Absolutely.
we can understand verifiable demand. It's like, okay, I get that, and then you layer on the digital scarcity, good money. Then
Yep.
we can, then we'll just push forward. Oh
Yep.
man. Swinging back to Avalanche, and I guess it's first sort of beachhead that you guys are looking to tackle, obviously being decentralized finance. Where do you see the space evolving to over, let's just say, the next, let's say 2 years, because the space moves so fast that like 3 years would
Hmm.
be like 10 years in normal time. So where do you see that particular
Yep.
space moving in 2 years, and how does Avalanche kind of position itself within that? Obviously, these are just your opinions and your ideas, so
Of
feel
course, of
free to
course.
make them as wild or ludicrous as you think.
Yeah, yeah. So I think there are a few things that I've heard, and I feel like I've gotten to wrap my head around. Is, like DeFi is dead. Like, I've heard that many times. I think that's totally false. I think with most of these things, especially with this much of interest and also value locked in, actually some sort of substance underneath it. So from the application layer, there's a lot of these cool early proof of concepts. I think they haven't been totally discounted yet. And so we're going to see a lot of boom and bust cycles continually throughout the next 2 years. We'll probably see another boom of DeFi. I don't know exactly when. Obviously, if I did, I would probably be a lot richer these days, I
Yeah, we'd
think.
be
But
going all in.
and
Yeah.
I think, yeah, we could probably discuss our strategies after the call. But I think there will be many boom and bust cycles in DeFi. There's also going to be many boom and bust cycles in NFTs as well. And we already seen a few. We saw CryptoKitties come to the space, and then kind of the first wave of NFTs that came, and then arguably the value kind of dropped a little bit after that. Similarly with DeFi as well, you kind of saw, let's see, like like stable coins, all of these actual assets that could potentially be useful for the traditional finance side, or the more mainstream side, if you will. And then you saw a lot of this activity with really highly speculative platforms like lending, like over collateralized lending, for example, derivatives platforms, all these things. I think that was like the first wave. I think now you had yield farming, which I didn't even personally keep up with that closely, to be honest. So I didn't really understand where it has netted out to these days, but that seemed to have kind of simmered down as well. And so I think similarly, in the background, maybe not like boom and bust cycles, but there will be smaller cycles on the enterprise side. So for example, like if you take when Bitcoin started coming out, all these enterprises were talking about blockchain. IBM was talking about blockchain. Accenture, all these massive firms wanted to be there first. And so they obviously don't have a token tied to their company, but they do have share prices tied to it. And I don't know if you recall, but there was a time where adding the word blockchain to your company header would pump your stock prices in the traditional equities realm like 10x or something crazy like that. And like if you had, I remember there was like a Long Island iced tea blockchain or something was a company or something crazy like that. And so point being, there's also going to be a lot of interest come back up in enterprises. And I think we're seeing that right now, actually, because I think people are like, I think the storm has calmed from the 2017 era. I think maybe we can reconsider. I'm sure also all these institutions have been continually working on their programs on the back end. Consensus reacquired or acquired Quorum, which was the JP Morgan central bank digital currency. Also, a lot of other major sovereign states have been developing central bank digital currencies. So I think, again, this is just the same pattern. I think I'm kind of taking a page out of Ray Dalio's book, maybe, but we're going to see these cycles. And then out of these cycles, there's also going to be kind of the phoenix rising out of the ashes type thing. And I think that's the most interesting piece. And whoever is able to capture that energy and then move forward with a new and innovative idea, they're the ones that's going to ultimately win, or at least win in that short term. And you've seen that time and time again. Like, I think Ethereum may have kind of come out of the ashes of the 2017 era, even though they kind of arguably may have started it with the ICOs perhaps. And then in the yield farming, I know, I mean, like Uniswap, I think is still kind of triumphant here in terms of the AMM space when it comes to decentralized exchanges. Maybe also like pick centralized exchanges as well. Like Coinbase had their fair share of issues in 2017 due to bottlenecks, and also just kind of the closed order books when they shouldn't be, et cetera, et cetera. And they're still triumphant here because they're able to add value to their customers. So I think that's the general header. Maybe something that'll be more interesting or maybe more edgy. I'm trying to think. I don't know. I don't know if I have one these days, but I think if I have one, I'll come back to you on that.
Got you. It's a tough question, admittedly, but I figured since it's such a hot button issue in an area, obviously, that you guys are pushing into quite aggressively, figured I'd pose it. But yeah, the space moves so quickly. You know, you look at where it's at today, and it'll be entirely different within 6 months. So
Right.
I don't fault you for having lack of specificity there. So before we wrap up, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you would like to make sure that you get out there, you know, to the world, whether, you know, specific
Sure.
details about the platform, about what you guys are working on building, blah, 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 whatever it may be, or potential announcements that might be around the corner. I just want to make sure, you know, that we cross all the T's and dot all the I's.
Sure. So I think just to reiterate, the Ethereum Avalanche bridge is coming very soon. So I think that'll enable a whole new world for these developers that have been waiting to port over their applications from Ethereum over to Avalanche and just try it themselves, to be honest. And so that's going to be really exciting. Obviously, the first phase will just be all these applications starting to just make sure that it's ready, testing it, QA, audits, et cetera. And then I think secondary, then we'll see the users start coming in and testing it out, trying to figure out what Avalanche is all about, but also what the offerings are all about and how different that experience is. And I think that is a crucial point for us. And so I think that's why we're trying to focus on that, I guess, workflow as much as possible. I think the other major thing that is worth noting that we've been working on since the beginning of September is this event called Money Dance. And so if for the listeners, it's moneydance.io. It is a hackathon, summit, and demo day all merged into one. It's produced by the Avalanche team, so the Ava Labs team, I guess, in relation to that, just in terms of the branding, the Avalanche project is kind of leading the forefront there. And so when it comes to the hackathon, it's running for 2 months. We have almost, I think I want to say 200 registrants so far on the hackathon side. And on the summit side, we're about 1,000 registrants on that end. And we have programming throughout the time of the hackathon just so everyone is remain interested, but also learns a lot while they're building their projects. And so we're kind of creating this, I guess it's not new by any means, because I know other hackathons have done this, but it's just this value add experience for the developers, but also people that want to tune in. And we have excellent speakers. We had Sergey Nazarov of Chainlink. We have Kat Brightman. She was the co-founder of Tezos. Jeff Garzik, CEO of Block. All these guys, super, super intelligent people, have a lot to share. Also have a lot of updates, especially during these times of COVID, while we're all being locked up in our respective rooms and our respective apartments and houses. And so that is going on. I think that's really interesting. And then at the very end, just to kind of close out that line of thinking, people that are working in the hackathon, they can compete for up to roughly around $30,000 in prizes. And then once you end as a semifinalist, there are 5 semifinalists, then you have the chance to compete in the demo day that kind of caps the event. And so the demo day, we have leading investors from venture capital funds and equity firms all across the world that judge your application. And effectively, you could have this opportunity to work with them in the future and also get the $10,000 grand prize. And so that is, I think, the secondary piece, moneydance.io.
Awesome. So, I mean, anyone that's listening to hear that's a developer, they got plenty of information for them to sort of go by and use. I'm super appreciative of you coming on the podcast. This was a super interesting conversation as well, and I can't wait to see how this all evolves over the coming months and years, to see where you guys carve out a piece for yourselves in, what I think is going to be one of the bigger spaces moving forward, which is decentralized finance. So that's why I was excited to have you on. I definitely want to have you back on in the future whenever we'll have additional news and things to talk about.
Of
But
course.
until then, I appreciate it, and I will talk to everyone next time.